3 years ago, a special package arrived at my house. Inside was a little snapping turtle. However, this was no ordinary snapper. It was a rare hybrid. The thing about hybrids is that they're unpredictable. In other words, we don't know how big they can get, and that little turtle, well, we'll just say that he's grown a little bit since then and needs a bigger home. Here's the full story. This was not my first time working with a snapping turtle. I actually raised a different one when I was much younger. Sadly, she passed away, but because of her, snappers are my favorite turtle, and I always knew I'd get another someday. Here's why. They're fascinating, beautiful, and what I want to focus on most, inquisitive. The catch is that they're the largest freshwater turtles in North America, with a big reputation for being aggressive and dangerous. Just in case I'm not being direct enough, this is not a good pet for most people. For context, alligator snappers hold the #1 spot, with some specimens weighing well over 100 pounds and attaining lengths of more than 30 inches. Here I am with a large male for reference. Common snappers come in at second place, and while impressive, they're typically much smaller than their cousins. That brings us back to Cookie, who was the result of an unintentional union between a female common snapper and a male alligator snapper. Although somewhat similar, ASTs are slower, large-bodied creatures with a prehistoric appearance, characterized by bumpy skin and spiky shells. They also have shorter necks, larger heads, and a formidable beak with the worm-like lure they use to attract prey. Meanwhile, CSTs are lanky and agile by comparison, with smoother skin and shells. Their heads and lureless jaws, while impressive in their own right, are significantly smaller than ASTs. However, they make up for that by having extremely long necks. Cookie is in many ways a chimera of sorts. He has some of the jagged characteristics you'd expect from an AST, while his body and demeanor are those of a CST, including the long neck. That's not too crazy until you take a close look at the business end. His jaws more closely resemble the size and shape of an AST, even trying to lure like one, but there's not actually anything there. TLDR, Cookie has the potential to be more dangerous than either of his parents because of the overlap traits. Only time's gonna tell how he's gonna develop. I'm not too big on hybrids or morphs, so I nearly passed on Cookie. I actually first saw him and one of his older siblings while touring Charlie Moorcroft's place. Charlie runs the Moorcroft Conservation Foundation, which partners with other conservation groups through educational opportunities and experiences. Part of that is that he breeds, raises, and fosters various animals, which serve as educational ambassadors until they can find long-term homes. I didn't go here seeking to get anything, and certainly not these hybrid snappers that he was fostering. However, Charlie knew snappers are my favorite and thought it would do well under my care. I agreed because I wanted to showcase an often misunderstood animal, and at the time I thought I was prepared for it. After all, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to work with a type of snapper I didn't even know existed. The thing about these turtles is that they aren't mean, just defensive. They typically don't like being handled and are best admired from behind the glass and water. The only challenge, pretty much all off-the-shelf aquariums aren't suitable for them long-term. Back in 2022, Cookie was still small, so that wasn't the case yet. He settled nicely into this mansion of a 75-gallon tank, though I knew it wouldn't be long until my hands were full. Right away, his curious nature came through as he explored every inch of the hardscape. It was a joy to observe, but I had to do it from a distance. He didn't trust me just yet, but thankfully, that didn't last too long. Within a month, he was already watching me more than I was watching him. Anytime I'd glance at the tank, sure enough, there he was, tracking everything I was doing. His growth kicked in quickly too, and it was no surprise given that he ate like a champ. By 8 months, he was noticeably more mature, though some of that baby turtle charm still remained. It was around then that Cookie had enough of exploring the hardscape. Now it was time to do some aquascaping of his own, tearing up plants and rearranging decor as he saw fit. Within a year, he had nearly doubled in size. No surprise there, but thankfully his growth kinda slowed down after that. I'd say by the 2-year mark he really started looking more like a common snapper, though he still had the big head and beak you'd expect from an alligator. Personally, I think he'll continue leaning that way, but only time will tell. I knew it wouldn't be long before he'd need to move to something bigger, and that time has finally come. At 3 years, he still has the same calm, inquisitive personality, but let's be real, he's no longer a harmless turtle. I hope to never find out what that means, and thankfully, handling these turtles can be pretty safe when done correctly. I'd have to do that shortly, but not before building him a new setup. I have a few things lined up to make that possible. The first is this 100-gallon stock tank, and the second is this 300-gallon stock tank. This big one is where Cookie's gonna live, and the small one is gonna become a filter. These stock tanks include pre-installed bulkheads, which I plan to link together. First I removed the caps and tightened everything to prevent leaks. Then I got 2 PVC adapters and wrapped them in Teflon tape. Going in a clockwise direction will stop it from becoming loose when installed. Next I used a 2-in-1 cement and primer to attach a pipe to each fitting. The bulkheads are at the same position on both tanks, so all I had to do was line them up and join them together with a flexible PVC coupling, though a PVC union would have worked too. I didn't want to use a single pipe in case I had to tighten the adapters after the fact. The connection's looking good and I've allowed it to cure overnight, but I better check it to see if it holds water before I do anything else. I assumed it would hold up fine, but it's always good to check. It was exciting to see the filter side fill up, confirming the 2 tanks were now a single system. Paper towels don't lie. I knew they'd alert me to even the smallest leak, and while I wasn't concerned about them, I lined this area as a good measure. The filtration setup would be a simple upflow system designed to hold as much biological media as possible. More on that later. To create the upflow effect, I started by shaping a piece of egg crate to fit at the bottom of the tank. I ended up finding a trash can lid that was an ideal template for an accurate cut. I also removed a section in the back to make room for a clean out pump. Then I got a handful of clay bricks I'd use to elevate this platform. A simple configuration would provide great support, and an added bonus is the surface area they'd create for beneficial bacteria. I'd include actual media though, which is where these bags came in. First up was lava rock. I already had a few bags, and it works great as a DIY media. The matrix within these rocks will house bacteria essential for keeping a healthy system. That said, they're always kind of dirty and need to be thoroughly rinsed. I also decided to add a few sticks of butter. I'm just joking. These ceramic blocks are similar to lava rock, but designed specifically for aquariums. Finally, I added a bag of random ceramic media on top. For circulation, I needed 2 things, a power head and a pump. I had old ones that were perfect for this. I just had to clean the power head and test the pump. I also wanted to add a lid to reduce evaporation. Luckily I had some polycarbonate in the shop that would be perfect for that. First I marked for it, and then cut it down to size. It was a perfect fit. The tubing for the pump was a different story. I used a heat gun to soften it enough to slip it over the barbs. Then I secured it with a hose clamp before doing some cord management and making cutouts. I'm unsure if Cookie will actually bask completely out of the water, but I wanted to give him the option. My plan was to build a PVC platform similar to the ones I had made in the old DIY pond using leftover materials. I already had pipes and a few elbows, but not enough. My ratchet cutter wasn't in the best shape either, so I went to the store to get those and a few sandstone pavers. These would sit on top of the PVC structure and create the platform. I lined up the couplings, measured everything, and cut the pipes to size. I assembled the top directly on the stones to ensure my measurements were correct before proceeding with the other. Then I measured for the desired water depth before cutting the posts and my finger in the process. Yeah, I guess you'll have that on these big jobs. These frames are usually solid enough without cement, so I don't typically add it. With the hammer drill ready to go, I marked 4 and made holes in the underside of the top stones, as well as 2 that I'd use for stability. I also added holes in the PVC to release trapped air. Then I rinsed and secured the stones. My main concern with this was having a top-heavy platform, which is why I prepared for these anchoring stones in advance. There's no way Cookie could tip this over, at least at his current size. Still, the structure was pretty exposed. To fix that and help Cookie access the surface more naturally, I pulled some large branches from my stash. They're dense enough to sink on their own, but I locked them to the platform so they can't be moved. Again, my goal was to create a height under the platform and ramps to the surface, and these allowed me to do that quite well. Finally, I got this piece of pre-drilled sandstone from an old setup that I used to anchor a faux universal rock boulder with. There wasn't much left to do with the scape, and the filter worked as expected, but I wasn't done yet. First, I added an air stone through the opening to boost circulation around the biomedia. Since the setup wasn't cycled yet, I jump-started it by transferring everything from Cookie's established filter. While a robust colony of beneficial bacteria is key to maintaining water quality for large animals, I knew I could supercharge it with plants. I stripped down this pothos to the bare roots for hydroponic growth, then suspended it above the water using a scrap of egg crate tied at the corners. I carefully threaded the roots through the crate into the water, leaving the foliage above exposed. As with other setups, these will help pull excess nutrients from the water. However, none of it would grow without light, and a simple shop light will do more than enough. I also had to figure out lighting above the basking platform. At first, I used hooks to suspend the UV light at the right height and mounted the heat lamp on an adjustable arm. It worked, but I began to worry that Cookie might snap at the exposed cords, which would end badly. I figured I could simply rig up an old screen underneath of this, and then I began to realize how overbuilt and convoluted it all was. So I went to the shop and combined various scrap boards to create this contraption. It's just a simple stand. The screen already had holes in it that I was able to use to mount it all under the frame, creating a secure caged barrier for the lights. Now that's more like it, and it even looks a little bit better than what was there before, but I can't really say that this system is pretty by any means, and it's really not meant to be. I'm just trying to have a functional setup here that will be able to house him safely until I have the time and resources to be able to set him up in his forever home. I never particularly enjoy this part because he doesn't like being handled, so I try my best to leave him alone. However, when I have to, I prefer to lower the water first. I did that and moved his prized piece of driftwood into the pond. He was in a good spot when I returned, so I seized the opportunity. He's kind of in a good position now, so really, just grab him here. This was probably one of the worst documented transfers on the channel, but my hands were full, I couldn't adjust the camera, and Alyssa didn't want to get closer. He didn't care either way and immediately calmed down in the pond. That's what I expected, but I was curious to see what he'd think of his new cave. He casually moved on in as if he owned the place and appeared to feel right at home. I let him settle in before checking on him later. He definitely sees me. I'm not sure if he trusts me again quite yet, although I don't blame him after what we just put him through. And he typically doesn't see me from the top like this, so it's probably not as ideal as seeing me from the front, but he looks pretty good in here. What I do know is that blueberries are some of his favorite foods, so let's see what he thinks. I've always enjoyed watching him eat because he's very meticulous about how he chews. I don't know about you, but there's just something different about seeing him do his thing from an underwater view. I think that this vantage point perfectly showcases the inquisitive nature of these amazing animals. They see red outside of water, which is usually how they're thought of, but in it, they're extremely calculated and deliberate with each move. While snappers aren't ideal pets for most, my hope was to showcase Cookie and share a stock tank build that could serve as a long-term solution for housing other aquatic turtles. They're much more affordable than large aquariums, and you can get as elaborate as you'd like. I kept this one bare bones because it's temporary. It works by pulling water through the bottom into the void under the media, where most of the debris will remain. The water is then filtered biologically by bacteria and plants before being recirculated by the pump. You may have noticed the absence of mechanical filtration. I remove any physical way storing water changes and thought it would be redundant. Though adding a sponge or floss compartment in the filter before it enters the void would be pretty simple. All you'd have to do is put a vertical piece of egg crate right about here. Keep in mind that this is just how I did it, and there are plenty of other options out there. What I will say is that you'll have better results if you include a lot of biological media. As for Cookie, this is not where he'll reside forever. The plan is to move him into an actual pond, but like the uncertainty of how he'll develop as a hybrid, the same is true for the actual execution of that. In the meantime, I'm curious to see how he develops in this environment. If you want more turtle content, you'll enjoy the time I recreated a Cypress swamp for my musk turtle, and when a few friends and I built an outdoor pond for albino snapping turtles. As always, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, Serpa Squad, take care and peace.